Welcome to the Mining the Dalkey Archive podcast, the Irish edition. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books, joined as always by Vince Franconi from Chicago, author in your own right. I always want to say the title of your most recent book, and I'm always
Hmm.
afraid I'm going to get it wrong.
Oh, go ahead. Fuck it up. I don't care.
This is a
Give it a
book no
shot.
one wants.
Pretty close. Pretty close. That's the first line. It's called The Book No One Wants. You just added
Oh,
a couple extra words. But
yeah,
that's okay. It should have been called that.
that's always like we've done this podcast so many times, and after I had it written down, every time after that, I feel like I go to say it, and I'm like, wait a second. I know that I have something wrong here. I know something's wrong. I do not want to make a mistake, but we're being honest in this podcast. It's always about honesty, right?
Not to mention that's the nature of the book. It should be like somebody else called it a book nobody bought, which as a joke, like as a they made a mistake in speaking it. But I'm like, that's actually a pretty good joke. Yeah, that's
It's a
even
pretty good
better.
joke too. It's pretty good.
So there
We
you
still
go.
need to do a podcast about that and about all your books actually, which would be very fun. Which are all listed in the show notes
Oh,
with links to where you can buy them. So please go forth and do that. Anyways, this is our monthly podcast where we talk about one of the books from the Irish part of Dalkey Archives catalog. And for this month, we're talking about Alannah Hopkins's The Dogs of Inishere, which is a short story collection from I believe 2017, correct? That came out from Dalkey, and that was the first. Dalkey was the original publisher of this book. So we did talk a bit about her last episode because she was married to Aidan Higgins, who's passed away, and whose book "Languish Go Down" we talked about last month. And she wrote a biography of him, which I'm going to script this title too. I'm going to need to look this one up. I was going to say a very strange man. Yeah, that's correct. A very strange man, a memoir of Aidan Higgins. For that, I almost said a very difficult man, which I think is what we also
me
like.
too. That was in my head. I was thinking difficult man. Yes.
Difficult man. So we talked about her in relation to Higgins, and in that book, she talks about her writing because she's very much a travel writer for various newspapers and outlets throughout most of the book and most of her relationship with Aidan Higgins, along with being a short story writer, which results in this book. She talks also in that memoir, which we might bring up again in a little bit, but she talks about meeting John O'Brien, getting involved with Dalkey Archive through Aidan Higgins, and then when she finishes her collection and is shopping it around, it's recommended that she talk to John about the book and send it to him. And she does have like a moment of like, but that's kind of like incestuous. He publishes Aiden. Like, why would he publish me? That's weird. And then goes through with it, and John picks up the book and publishes it. So they were close to some degree because there's also something else we'll talk about where she wrote an obituary about him. But I think what's maybe the best place to start with Dogs of Inishere, which is 11 short stories, nice, like not super long book, very tight, very interesting short stories. But you wanted to talk about like your feelings going into this. She was an author that
Yeah.
I was only familiar with as like that this book existed and that she was Higgins' widow, but I didn't know her specific writing before entering this either. Like I had never read one of her stories.
Yeah, I mean, this is my first time for hers. Lancashire was my first time for Higgins. So I'm new to all this, but it is something that occurred to me when I was reading it that these are good stories. I'm like two or three stories deep, and suddenly I'm like, oh yeah, I'm liking these. And it made me realize that I think I have a unconscious bias against short stories sometimes.
Me too. Me
And
too.
I don't know. Do you? Okay.
Yeah,
I, so
100%.
I, so there's this famous book review that Dorothy Parker wrote about Hemingway's short stories, and she loved it, and she liked his short stories better than his novels. And I actually totally agree. Like I can't go back to his novels, but I'll read a couple of his short stories, and they're pretty good, and they're tight, and they kind of I think work better with his style. And Dorothy Parker, being a short story writer, said something, and I'm like paraphrasing that Americans judge quality of literature with a yardstick, and she finds that unfortunate because like short stories don't sell. And it made me also think of like everybody I know who got an MFA, like they teach you to write short stories for 2 or 3 years, and then you go out and you query an agent, and the agent says, "Oh, sounds really interesting. Do you have a novel?"
Yep.
Because like novels fucking sell and short stories apparently don't. And I wonder if like I've internalized some of that maybe American bias against the short story.
I totally agree with you. I've always felt like a weird like I like short stories. Growing up in college, I'd try and write short stories like you say, read more collections because they were like assigned to us like or whatever, and they're like Julio Cortázar I was a huge
Hmm.
fan of his and started with a lot of his short story collections. But then at some point I was always like, I could read a short story book, or which will be like quick little hitters, or I could read a novel, which I'll be able to like
Yeah.
spend more time with. I When we were doing the Best Translated Book Award, this I sort of hypothesized about this. I think it still holds true. Is that one reason that short story collections don't do well in awards is because when there's one story that isn't as good as the
Hmm.
others, it stands out. Whereas in a novel, there's sections that you're like, that wasn't a great section, but it's washed away. And I wonder how much of that impacts my like, oh, I got to a story I didn't like, and now I'm done, I'm out, versus like just
Yeah.
letting it go. But that
That's
yeah.
I should be better then, because like one of the things I understood when I was reading a lot of poetry, and I studied poetry in grad school, and it's sort of it's something where I spent a lot of years just only almost exclusively reading it for at least a year or two. And I realized like a poetry collection's short, so they're usually like 80 pages max.
Mhm.
And you can technically just blaze through them quickly if you want, but you're supposed to read them slowly and, two or three times each. And I've never, there's maybe three poetry collections that it's like I like every poem in this book. Most of the time, there's a dud, or there's one that it's fine and it just doesn't resonate as strongly as the
Yeah.
one before, or maybe the one that's coming up in one or two. So you don't really care. It's just like, that was fine. Okay. But in 2 or 3 pages, there's another poem that's completely a new thing, a new experience, and it's amazing and it justifies like that. And I don't care. And it's the same thing with a short story collection. Like if there's one short story that's not amazing and the others are, I should, in my mind, be able to just overlook that. But perhaps that is a thing where, because it's not a cohesive whole thing, you forgive it. You don't forgive it as much.
Yeah, and I do like one of the things that's always appealed to me about short stories from the times I've read them almost exclusively was that they can be formally innovative in a way that a novel
Hmm.
couldn't. Because you can do it tight, you can do things that are like you can see it much more quickly than a novel that you do have to read the whole thing to look back on that kind of structure or something complicated or unique. Whereas if it's like even like 30-page short story, you can read the 30
Hmm.
pages a couple times to get like how things got put together. And I do really appreciate that. But nevertheless, like outside of the ones that we publish and a handful, I can't think
Hmm.
of a short story collection that I've just read recently, like just on my own for fun without any other rationale behind it.
Yeah, it's sort of weird because I follow writers who are novelists, or I'll follow a writer who's a poet, and people who almost primarily work in the short story form. I feel like I used to really get excited about like a Tobias Wolff book would come out, and you'd be like, Tobias Wolff's got the goods. He can write a really just perfect short story. It's just like this craft thing that's executed so well.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, maybe he's got more books out. I stopped somewhere 20 years ago with him, which is a shame because like he would come to town and do readings, and I'd get excited. But that's old me. I don't know what happened to that person. I think the novel buried him,
I
and
think TikTok took over short stories.
maybe.
Because
Well,
you're,
that's another thing. Like, well, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, that's another thing. You're in publishing, like, this. Like, is it still the case where short stories? I know you said they don't necessarily win the awards, but they must be coming out, right? Collections,
I think that they
I
do.
assume.
I think they very much do. However, and in terms of the sales thing, our like Hasong Nan books that are all short stories from the
Hmm.
Korean author, those do
Mm,
very, very, very well for us. Very well for us. So
okay.
but then there are other short story collections we've done that just nothing. So it really does seem to be kind of hit or miss in terms of like the sales and the reception of them, and maybe like the sort of like interest in Korean literature and culture maybe
Mm,
bolsters her a little bit, but also it is like a creepy, psychological, weird, disturbing sort of story, which also fits like our time. I always thought that short stories should do better simply because people don't have attention spans, but then wondered if one of the reasons they don't sell is because people they encounter them in magazines. If you're a reader, you can encounter a short story online, you can encounter it in a magazine, you can read a lot of short stories from even the same author without having to buy a collection.
mm.
Like when we judge the
Yeah, and
uh, yeah. When we judge the Kafka Prize for the University of Rochester, one of the rules is that short story collections are obviously eligible. However, I think it's what percentage is it? I think it's no more than 70% can have appeared in previous publications.
mhm.
So it has to be like new work. And I can't tell you how many times I can just toss aside, be like, well, this book's not eligible because there's everything's appeared elsewhere. And I think that promise of which, as an MFA student, you want to get your stories in a collection. You want to get your stories out there through all these different things and then bring them into a collection almost kind of backfires in the sense that like because
Mhm.
you've seen them all, like why would you then pay for the book? Um, but that is what it is.
I'm thinking of like the last time I remember a short story having a huge impact was the cat person story in the New Yorker.
What I
And
was
I know
thinking of
that
too.
person has a collection, and I have not read that collection. Although,
Nobody has.
okay, I was wondering because I have strong feelings about that story that, I could get into, but perhaps it'll get me a wave of shit. So maybe I won't. I don't know.
Fair enough. I did not care for the story. The book is not called Cat Person, which is a
Hmm.
problem. Cat Person is
Yeah,
in
you
that.
think
You think you would just lean into? There is a movie called Cat Person, but the book's
yes.
not called that. I think her
Fucking
name's like Kristen
you want to
Rukian or
market
something like
this?
that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. But
Maybe try putting the most famous story that's been written in the past like 15 years on the
yeah,
cover.
yes. Unless it's sort of buried like author of cat person at the bottom, but it's like it's in this if it's in there. Because
It's
if I
in
saw that
there.
book on the shelf, I would have assumed this is her second book because the first one clearly is the cat person book that I just didn't know about. And this is the
Absolutely.
follow-up.
1000%. 1000%. So related to this, so related to Dogs of Inishere. So I had to drive back from the Wisconsin, Minneapolis area uh over last weekend. And it was the worst 2 day drive of my life. They had in Chicago, I had got stuck behind like a ton of traffic. There's a problem with my rental car where I couldn't use the Easy Pass. Everything was like chaotic. It took an extra 3 hours. It was just like nightmare. And then on the way from Michigan to here, because it's like a split up drive, and then in Michigan to here, there was I don't know if you would have heard of this. I don't think you would, but there was a tour van that flipped over on the in the median of I-90, like the major throughway through from Chicago all the way through to
Hmm.
Rochester and beyond. And it was just outside of Buffalo. So as I was getting to Buffalo, the GPS was like your estimated time of arrival is like 1 hour and 12 minutes. And then it was like 3 hours and 50 minutes. And I was like, wait, what's happening? It was like 4 hours. And it's like, oh my God. And it had me get off onto like all these winding roads. It took so long to get home. I get home late on like Friday night. I'm lying here. I'm like, I got to start on the book. I got to start reading this book for the podcast. I'll read a story before I go to bed. And I ended up reading the first four stories because I was just like, I like this
Hmm.
a lot. I'm going to just keep reading this and like keep putting down notes. This is really fun. It's like 1 a.m. I'm exhausted. And I was like, no, I'm here for this. So I was like, in a way, sort of surprised too. I had no doubts that it would be like high quality, very interesting, so on and so forth. But with that sort of
Hmm.
like, oh, short stories, and thinking I could just like bite one or two off at any point in time to get like sucked into where I was like, what's the next one going to
Hmm.
be? Was kind of a fun and like surprising experience for me.
Yeah, same here. And I had a when I was in grad school, like one of my teachers for creative writing said most of the problem that he thinks short story collections, especially the first short story collection by a writer, encounters is there's a lack of cohesion to the tone. Because you'll have like one story that's doing possibly that's born of possibly like a grad school prompt in
Yeah.
an MFA class, and then you have another one that's more experimental, and then another one that's like, okay, emulate Chekhov or something, or like do your Ray Carver thing. And so sometimes it feels like tonally disjointed. And I mean, I don't think that's what's going on with these stories. I think
I
she's
don't either.
clearly a more polished but at the same time, um, it does feel like I was already clustering these into like the slice of life, the impressionistic one, the slightly more ambitious, the more like this is the relationship love story. There's a fucking ghost, I think, at
The
one point.
ghost
Like that
story.
came
I
out of
was going to
nowhere.
say the ghost story. Yeah.
Which is actually, I think, my favorite in a lot of ways. It's just
Oh,
because it was so
really?
weird and surprised. I don't know. It's just it was different, and I'm like, all right, but it's not so different that I felt like it's a different writer. So
No.
it's like, and it wasn't so heavy of like a gothic. It just had this like weird little Emily Bronte Wuthering Heights twist or something at the end, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I'm in for this. Like she earned it by that point. Like front loading
100%.
that story, maybe I would have rolled my eyes, but like it's halfway through the book, and you're like, oh, okay, I trust her.
I really like that story. The other one, I think it's right after that is Coup.
Yeah, Koo's great.
Coup is
Yeah,
broke my heart. Who fucked
that's a
me up?
standout. That's a really Yeah, that's a strong story. And
So
again, like we don't need to, we can summarize if you want and go for it. Yeah, because I'm
sure,
trying
a
to
little. Well,
remember
I mean, you
exactly how
give
to even
away the
talk about
end
these.
by talking about it a little bit,
Yeah, that's what I'm
which is
worried about.
which makes it a little hard. I don't want to give away the end, but it's a story that's told by Captain Bill, who people call Coup, and he has finds out that he has health issues, and the way that he deals with those, and the way that the story like resolves itself from like outside. There's like he's part of it at the beginning, but then it's told by someone observing and like a different narrator. But like by the end and like how that resolves is like pretty heartbreaking and very like
Yeah.
gut punchy and felt like, yeah, my birthday's coming up. My 50th birthday is coming up. I don't know how I feel about that. And this one kind of landed a little harder. I do, I'm going to digress for a minute. Dude, I
Sure.
saw you. I was in your car when I was going to turn 40. So it was like we were having an event. It would have been in like this month, like around the same time, 10
Mhm.
years ago. And we're in the car and I was like, yeah, I don't want to be 40. This is scary. And you're like, dude, 40 is like the first time when you turn 40, you're like, yeah, this is like, I'm facing mortality. This is tough. He's like, by the time you're 42, you're like, I don't give a fuck anymore. Like everything
Yeah.
doesn't, it's
Yeah.
fine. So
Yeah. I
I
hope that
think about that
helped.
a lot.
Well, for the record, 50, since that happened to me a few years ago, is like it didn't bug me as much, but I do notice because I've always, like, even when I was 40, like to maybe sort of brag a little, like I think I looked 30 something. And
Yeah.
now as I'm the closer I'm getting towards like halfway through 50, I'm 54 this year I turned. It's like, oh yeah, like oh, there's more grays and I can't seem to shed weight like I used to so easily. And I'm going to like tomorrow I'm going for my annual physical and I'm like, I'm sure they're gonna find something that's wrong
I,
with me. Like it's getting a little less optimistic.
dude, and that this is also a digression, but like because this podcast, all my podcasts revolve around like a little bit of TMI. Like after my last physical was not good, I was having a lot of problems, like with things that were impacting my health. I totally quit drinking, went on vegetarian diet, do my Pilates every day, and I lost 28 pounds. So I'm done. I
There
can't
you
lose
go.
any more weight, and I cannot gain any more weight because I'll never lose it again. This is
Yeah.
peak. This is my ending peak. After this, I'm done.
See, but that's the thing. I already am a vegetarian and I already do go to the gym pretty regularly. I hate it, but I go. I haven't quit drinking, but I haven't actually had anything to drink for a couple of weeks. I think I just took a few weeks off. I usually do that and then I hit it hard. But like I quit smoking years ago. I don't even fucking drink coffee anymore. I drink tea. Like
What?
I think I'm living in a pretty good life as
Yeah, you're
far
doing
as
okay.
taking care of this machine. But I know if I slip in any way, this all goes to shit.
That's the thing.
Like
That's the thing. That's
I'm like
exactly it.
I'm like one night of like pizza and too much whiskey away from just putting on weight and my hair falling out and fucking screaming cancer or something. I don't know. Like
Hundred
perhaps
percent.
it's fatalistic, but
100%. Little minor surgery leads to depression, leads to a lot of alcohol, and then you're
yeah,
and too much stress. Too much stress. So,
yeah.
anyways,
Well, that's really it.
that's
So
really
maybe that story affected us for this reason is like because well, for the record, like the reason I like that story is that it is like a heartbreaking story that isn't maudlin,
yeah.
which it would have been so easy to be like a saccharine thing that I rolled my eyes at,
100%, but it
and
ends
I
with
do
like
that easily.
beautifully. It ends so
Yeah.
beautifully. Like there, and that's one of the things I wanted to point out about this. Like when we talked about Aiden Higgins and about her biography, I mentioned that there are a lot of times in that book where she's like, and then I shared my stories with Aiden, and he's like, this isn't very good. You can't publish this. This is bad. Like a lot of like heavy criticism. And then you read these stories, and I'm like, she's an amazing writer. Like she's just got it.
Mhm.
Like she can write a good sentence. She is very perceptive. The way that these are told and constructed is beautiful. I really enjoy them. And so like all that criticism like feels like so weird in retrospect, but also like it's kind of that generation of dude, maybe like
Yeah, a
the
little bit. I think it
like,
is.
like
Mhm.
a lot. So um with the
I don't
stories
know
though.
because
Oh, what's
oh, go
that?
ahead.
No, you
I was
talk.
just gonna say like well, I'm just curious because I mean, having read the book, maybe there's more insight into this, and I think like I don't think she's from what you've told me, she's not like trash talking him or anything, but I
Never.
get the impression that he wouldn't be the first to do this, but that kind of, I mean, clearly a talented, important writer, and it wouldn't be the first time that like a male writer's ego kind of overshadowed and maybe subconsciously sidelined his female companion's ambitions and talents. I don't know.
I get that. That's the vibe I got too. It's a little bit of like
Okay.
people aren't buying your book, Satan. They're like, whatever. And she I don't know like in terms of level of popularity, but according to her bio, she was published by where did this go? London Magazine, the Cork Literary Review, and was shortlisted for the RT Short Story Award. She's also in the book. She talks about this a lot. An art critic and book reviewer. She has her
Mhm.
two novels and her nonfiction book, nonfiction books, which include Eating Scenery, West Cork, The People and the Place, all of which seem to be relatively like successful and popular. So I could see that too, where you're saying like, you know, you I mean, I'm the male writer that writes the books, and this that's more successful than needs to be like taken down a notch because that's threatening in some level. So
Yeah.
I can see that.
Well, in my experience, when there's a dominant personality artistically and they say that your stuff is shit, it's because it doesn't resemble what they're doing.
True,
But
very true.
so there's that too.
So I know there's certain stories that I was really affected by, but two of them that we were talking about before we got on here were the two that you
Mm,
wanted to bring up first, which
yeah.
is Ripe and what is the last one called?
You can't call it that?
You can't call it that, which sounds like a title
Yeah.
that which I'll never remember because it sounds like a title of one of your books.
Yeah, it's perfect. Maybe that's why I liked it so much.
Exactly. Just like,
Yeah. I so like I clustered those two for the obvious connection of Ripe is mostly about it's not about, but like the central sort of I guess lodestar of that story is Malcolm Lowry. And
yes.
I love that that story sort of begins with her in a pub and all these people are just trash talking Lowry and she's like a huge fan.
Which I had the biggest question. I wrote like notes in the margin, like, do that many people talk about Malcolm Lowry? Like, where is
Me,
it? Like
you mean like talk about him or talk about him badly?
both. Both. I don't it's a different
Mhm.
setting, it's a different scene, it's a different time. But I'm like, I don't remember ever having anyone, like any group of people around me talk about Malcolm Lowry.
Yeah, whenever I've had anyone talk about Malcolm Lowry, it's usually I didn't finish the book, is what they
Right.
usually say. Under the Volcano is definitely an imposing novel. I love it. I think
It's
it's
so good.
great, and I read it kind of like I don't remember why I even read it, but it was how sometimes you're just like I need to read this thing. That book always makes me think of like Ellison's The Invisible Man is the same thing where I just was like I need to read that. Like I don't know why I haven't gotten around to that yet. And then you just lock in. And that was another thing like I read it and I just locked into like how good this is. And
Yeah.
so I was surprised that not a lot of people were talking about it the same way they talk about like every other kind of big ambitious, possibly impossible to read book. But I mean, Under the Volcano is not impossible to read. It's a pretty readable book if you just have to surrender again to a very like overly sometimes overwrought prose style that I think is just really interesting and at times beautiful and striking. But I could see why people would. I think maybe there's something about being in England and being. I think it's kind of like the Irish tendency to like knock the successful writer down a peg or two. Or the success, like we can't have a hero who's a local boy without like them getting too big for their britches mentality, which
Yeah.
feels very familiar as a Chicago thing as well, for the record.
Right.
But maybe that's it, and maybe for us, it's like Lowry is not. He's like lesser British in some way for us, but for them, he is kind of he's a celebrated novelist. I mean, they made his book into a movie. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a movie for Under the Volcano, and I think there's got to be studies and people who are
For
sort of like
sure.
Lowrarians.
For
But
sure.
I
I
don't
just
know.
it just stood out to me as like this is that, and then I was like, as part of that in here, part of why they're talking about it is to kind of hurt her feelings. It seems like because that is like her place of
Yeah.
study. Like the character is studying Lowry, is very into Lowry, knows everything about Lowry, which like as that starts becoming coming clear is like, are these people just trying to like fuck her vibe? Like what is this? But I too really love that story. I thought it was great. She goes out to the countryside to see his town where he grew up, to see the grave, to experience it, and to then come to understand like the feeling about like separating yourself from all that kind of nonsense at the city and at that sort of like mentality that they have and they're displaying there. So I love that. I love kind of those escape the world stories in a way.
Mhm. Yeah, and I like it's literary. It's inspired by, the sort of fanatical worship of a literary hero, but it's sort of the kind of dream that I think a lot of us have is you can get in these discussions and they can be very academic and very stimulating and all that, but it's sort of like that movie The Squid and the Whale. Have you seen that?
Oh, I've seen that a
Where
million times. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know how every time Jeff Daniels talks about a writer, it's like, well, it's minor Dickens or it's minor
Yes.
Shakespeare, and it's like there's this kind of I can't admit to my love of this thing. I can't show any real enthusiasm, is how I think a lot of academic conversations that are very urbane can be framed. So like escape that and to like go and just disappear into ripe is kind of cool. In the
Yeah.
same way that like as a Joyce fanatic, not necessarily a Joyce scholar, like if I talk to people about Joyce, it's either, they don't read them in the same kind of way, or the ones who do can kind of like render it joyless. And
Yeah.
I have this fantasy of like I'm just going to disappear to like Sandymount and Dublin and Dalkey and all these things and just really just like get into the real like scenery of it and just vibe with it in that way. Right?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That would be great. It would be the best. But you're connecting that with the last one due to the fact that they're both are about writers. So, and Ripe,
Yeah.
it's fairly straightforward, in terms of like it's telling, like it's it's like what is the word I'm looking for? Linear. It follows like a
Hmm.
very clear trajectory, and then the last story, you can't call it that, is a different vibe, but also about an author, in this case B.S. Johnson, but is more of like a look at B.S. Johnson and then kind of a refutation of his approach to writing, which I found fascinating because the whole way through, for
Yeah.
me, as I was reading it, I was like, God, I love B.S. Johnson. I really want to
Hmm.
reread. I've had this, and
Yep.
I've read everything except for Trawl, but like I have had this, like whatever you call it, omnibus from that I bought in Great Britain, God knows how many years ago, and I've wanted to reread it. I have the original Albert Angelo, the House Mother Normal,
Hmm.
Christy Mallory's Double Entry, The Unfortunates, which this whole story sort of revolves around. I have all those other versions and this, and I always think like, God, I want to revisit him. He's so fun. I love him. And as I was reading that story, I was like, this is it. This is the time. This is when I should do it. And then immediately at the end, when she's like, but
Yeah.
it's on him, and I was like, oh, oh, maybe I don't want to
Yeah.
do
What to make?
that.
What to make of this? Well, this is maybe why I loved it, and I think it's a really curious last story.
Yeah.
That's another thing about short story collections or poetry collections, or even like record sequencing is so kind of important. So
Yeah.
again, if there's a ghost story in here and it appears midway through, like Hopkins has earned that from like in my opinion. So I'm like, cool, let's go for it. And then if there's a story that ends that's this kind of it's probably the most radically different of all the stories to me, where it's less
Same.
there's not really a narrative. There is kind of more like it's almost like an essay about B.S. Johnson in a sense. And then it just sets it up where because it's very reverential, I think, for most of it until she finds the unfortunates. This is my copy of the New
Yes.
Directions copy. And
Same.
like the big thing of the book is, all the separate books that are in it, that it's like you can mix and match and they come in a box and it's a really cool little box. And I get that if I'm remembering the thing, it's just like that's so innovative that she's like, I have to find this book. I have to find this book. And then she reads it and it's just like, nah, no. Maybe the conceit is interesting, but the execution is dull. Because it is just about him, like it's about a friend dying of cancer and he's
Yeah.
covering like a football match. And I mean, that is the story essentially. There's no story.
There's no
So
story. Yeah. And
maybe
like
she was disappointed.
it's interesting because part of her story in relationship to that is that B.S. Johnson is trying to be honest about the inability to write in some ways, or like to
Yep.
communicate through writing, which is such a Dalkey theme, right? Like in the Dalkey books,
Mhm.
that's always this like the writer trying to write a story, failing, trying to write a story again, tell the story, keep telling the story, figure out the way through
Mhm.
repetition to tell. And so like this book as a Dalkey book kind of like puts in a little like,
Mhm.
but is this really like what is this? Like essentially, which I thought was really
Yeah.
interesting.
Huh. I mean,
Like
we always have this like what makes a Dalkey book conversation, and that's a really like in that sense, it's almost commenting on that theme. I mean, obviously, it's a kind of like a happy coincidence, perhaps, but I mean, even the title of the press is the Dalkey Archive, which is really I never thought about this before, but I've said that like it's I think The Third Policeman is a superior book to the Dalkey Archive, but in a sense, The Third Police or the Dalkey Archive by Flann O'Brien is him rewriting the story that he failed to get published, and in my mind, kind of making it a lesser thing. But it is like trying to tell the story again. So the actual
Yeah.
name of the press is named after a book that was an attempt to retell a story that he considered a failure.
And
So
as
I guess
simply as
that is what makes a Dalkey book.
and as simply put that like calling it third policeman press or at swim two birds press would sound terrible. Like, I think
Yeah, it's true. The Dalkey Archive does actually have a ring to it for sure.
I
But
think that I think that was part of the conversation with Sorrentino. I would be remiss that if I didn't mention that one of the podcasts that we did for this some months ago was with Nicholas Del Banco about his collection of
oh,
stories, Reprise the Collected Fictions, and that was the last short story collection that I've worked on in terms of helping like
mhm.
edit parts of it, put it together, then read it for that podcast, reread it for that podcast. And he is maybe in the same sort of grouping with Hopkin because it's like very like classic in a sense, like so well written, so
Mhm.
like beautiful, so precise. Everything's like where it's supposed to be. There's not a lot of like fluff
Mhm.
and there's not a lot of like, oh, well, that doesn't really make sense. Or like, there's not that. It's like very crisp. And in a way, they do seem as
Hmm.
short story writers from Dalkey to make sort of sense together and to be like
Hmm.
one kind of branch of like the Dalkey catalog that may not be this like crazy experimental, like meta thing, and yet has like touches of that, like in this story where it's like a little bit aware of itself, but also like are just
Yeah.
like amazingly well told stories that are like pointing at certain things of human nature that are interesting and
Hmm.
told with like different varying forms and various attempts. So I think I mean they're both great, and it reminds me that yeah, I like short stories. I just don't read them that much, I guess.
Yeah, and like a friend of mine's first book was a short story book, and it's really solid, and it's like these are the short stories that people should be writing. It's like classic. It's not just like riffing off completely like Raymond Carver and all that, but it is in that vein of like it's observational, it's impressionistic, it's a little bit of it's not an entirety. It's just like here's a day in a life, here's a scene, there's something maybe consequential that happens that's noteworthy, but otherwise, like I remember reading and just being like these feel very effortless, but you can tell these are the product of a lot of work, and I think that gets a little bit ignored because it doesn't have like when I think of the novels that are so ambitious that are allowed to be sloppy,
Yeah,
um, like 2666 was such a big book when it came out. I remember reading it and loving it and thinking like, this is what a sprawling, ambitious mess of an unfinished book. Like it's unlike anything else. And then even in that book, like there's this moment where like somebody says they prefer reading like Bartleby the Scrivener to Moby Dick, and I think there's another example, and it's sort of like is this Bolaño's meta thesis for this novel and his excuse for it being sloppy? Because he even says like, what a shame that people prefer the tight, perfectly constructed thing to the ambitious
that's
mess. And I always felt like that was like a meta statement in the book. But and if you read Bolaño's short stories, they're kind of weird messes too, frankly. But like there is something about a tight like I would rather read Melville's Bartleby than Moby Dick again. I mean, it's just
huh,
a perfect short little
yeah,
thing. Whereas as much as I love the bigger stuff, and I'm not like denouncing those at all, it's just so well crafted and perfect. This
absolutely.
tight little package.
When you're talking about sequencing, one of the things that with I mentioned Hassan Nan earlier, but one of the things that we've done with every one of her books is that with her translator, I always rearrange the stories. Like they come in one order,
Hmm.
and I've every time been like, I think that this order works better. There's like a like the sequencing, like an album. Like I only think of things in
Hmm.
terms of albums, which I don't think exist anymore among like like most people's consciousness. They're like, was it a TikTok song? What do you mean album? Like, was it a single? So I always think of things in that way, and I would restructure them to be like the first one has to have a certain hook to it. The second one is better than
Hmm.
the first one generally. The fourth one is your banger. In this book, the fourth story is the ghost story, which is like so.
Oh, there you go.
So it's
Interesting.
like, oh shit, like that's it.
Interesting.
But when you talk about
Yeah.
the sequencing too, one of the short story writers I read in college more than obviously now, and short story writer is like the wrong term, was Joyce Carol Oates. And I loved Joyce Carol Oates'
Hmm.
story collections at that time because they would be thematic. Like Heat is one of them that I remember the best. And there was one other one that I'm not thinking of, but Heat's the one I always remember in that it starts out like everything sort of relates to that concept, but the stories start out fairly straightforward, normal, 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 and then the last like story is just fucking batshit, and you've built up to like this like truly batshit ending where it felt like it was like a constructed. I mean, the craft behind the sequencing feels real too, and I think that that's always been something that appeals to me when I read a short story collection, is seeing like how
Hmm.
that's put together as much as it is the individual stories.
Yeah, it's because the other thing is I've had people tell me the thing about a short story collection is you should consider it to be something that might take you years to get through. Like in theory, you could pick it up, read a story, put it on your nightstand, and then go and read your novels, watch your videos and so forth. And then it's there waiting for you again because it doesn't necessarily have to have like a through line or anything like that.
Correct.
So, but I don't know. I like the idea of it being more sequenced with that intentional start to finish, like a mixtape, as you're kind of describing,
Yeah.
because that shows a little bit more intention and purpose. Otherwise, it could just be a random collection, like maybe a big fat anthology of different writers and different stories, like the best American story of 2000 and whatever, is maybe more lends itself to that. Like, let's just let it sit around as this anthology I pick up from time to
That's
time
true.
without a lot of connection. But if it's your writing or your story collection, you probably want it to have a certain logic to it. I think
Yeah, like
sequencing is really important.
I do too. I'm like fascinated by it. I don't like it's one of those things I really love to say that I think about a lot, and I sort of think about a lot,
Hmm.
but I don't know how you really think about it. Like it's a little bit like you're sending someone on a journey, and like how, I don't know. It's an interesting like sort of ambiguous kind of thing to try and like articulate.
Yeah, but you do nail it with that idea of thinking in terms of music. There's an essay that I teach at school, a couple of years old, from the New Yorker. Vincent Cunningham wrote this essay called "What Makes an Essay American,"
Ooh.
and he said it starts off with this anecdote of how he was talking to a DJ, and this DJ, is good at his job. He plays the music that gets people on the floor, and he was asking the DJ like, what makes a good DJ set, and he's just like, well, I learned to be a DJ by growing up in black churches and going to gospels, and it's just like it's the same thing a preacher does, where like you come out and you establish the trust, like I'm going to do what we do every week because this is community and this is what we do. It's like you don't kick off with the sermon like where you
Right.
deviate from the scripture. You start off with like, let's review some scripture. And I'm thinking more along like even my Catholic upbringing, it's like it is a lot of ritual, ritual, ritual. And midway through, let me talk to you for 15 minutes about whatever I feel like preaching, and I'm gonna riff. And he's like, you
Yes.
can earn that, like, let's throw a weird jam in here that maybe wouldn't be the first thing I put on. So it's really important. He's like, a DJ is the same way. You have to get him on the floor, get him on the floor, keep him on the floor, and then maybe let's throw something that I actually want to hear on that not
Yeah.
everybody is going to be into, but they'll trust me enough to sit through it for the next song. So it is
Yes.
very, and essays are the same way. So he used the essay on pandering by Claire V. Watkins,
Yes.
which was like a big, big essay as this example of like, it's kind of an American essay in the sense of it starts with the anecdote, it builds you onto this little joke, you're trusting, and then I'm going to drop my thesis in, and then I'm going to do this. When I read that essay, it ends with like, let's burn this motherfucker down and build something new, which is kind of like your, drop the mic moment. It's
Yeah.
very well constructed from that. And that's not bad, but part of me is also like, now that I see it, I kind of don't love the essay anymore because I'm like, it's so fucking contrived.
I do like her a lot though, to be honest. Like the essay aside, I think she's great. Also like weird personal history and very interesting books. But yeah, and this is like the B.S. Johnson one is that mic drop point. Like, is
Yeah,
this
it
is
is absolutely a mic drop essay for me or story because I didn't see it. It's unlike the others, but it doesn't deviate too stylistically, so it feels like it belongs. It's not like I'm reading something completely foreign,
no.
and I really expected it to be like the first, like Ripe, where it's just like, oh, this person is my hero, and I worship them, and I'm doing this thing that makes me closer to them. Instead, it's like I'm searching for this book, and now I just am questioning the entire validity of the career of like the British experimental movement of the mid 20th century.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I didn't, I've never seen any of his movies that are referenced in there at all. Like those are
It's
sort of
on,
new to me. I knew that they existed, but I didn't really think about them
yeah.
for years. The,
I think you can watch the one on like Fat Man on the Beach is on YouTube or something. But I
what's
one of these
not on
days I'll do
YouTube?
that.
Like literally, like anytime I want to steal a TV show or whatever, it's on YouTube. It's always there. But one of the
Yeah.
things I noticed early on with this that reminded me of Joyce in a sense was that the first
Hmm.
few stories have a little bit of a like a thematic bit where the character is looking for like one small great moment. So maybe not an epiphany, but
Mhm.
like just one good moment. And this pops up a few times in the first three stories and then doesn't necessarily pop up again after that. But
Mhm.
for example, where do I have this signed? Um, it's like even within the Lowry one, she's trying to have like the one moment to go out and have this experience. Like this experience is the thing that she's looking forward to, and that would be like the sort of like the bit. So for instance, it's page 16. It was such a simple and obvious idea, but it was enough to lift the depression and replace it with a mildly manic euphoria, which I can definitely relate to. But that idea of like finding that euphoria through this like little bit. Um, and where's the next one? I had these all marked, but now they're not. Well, that's a joke about something else. She felt the that's where is it? Um, I'm not finding it now, but anyways, there are a couple of those that pop up in those first stories where it's just like, here's a little moment that you're looking for. Even when she memorizes in one of the stories where the character has to memorize the poem and nails the poem, and then
Mhm.
there's like the opposite of that, the moment where she overhears being like, oh, well, she's like, clever but not smart, or lucky. She's lucky but not clever.
Yeah.
And like that moment is like that kind of opposite. Like focusing things on like one important moment felt a little bit like the epiphany thing from Joyce, but taking it in a different sort of way, and treating it slightly
Interesting.
differently. But that stood out to me
Yeah.
from these. I also one other like two other stories. One, the shooting incident in County Tipperary, I fucking loved.
Mhm.
I fucking love that story. Like
Yeah.
people getting gunned down and violence and a double affair situation. Yes, just give
Yeah.
it to me.
It's that's sort of almost like bog gothic as a genre, which
Oh
is
yeah,
I don't know if you've ever heard that term, bog gothic, which is
nah, but I
usually
love it.
applied to Patrick McCabe. Patrick McCabe is sort of one of my favorite of the Irish writers. His new book's out. Do you know about the Presleys on this? Is a bit of a digression, but do you know about The Butcher Boy? You heard that book,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
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 so that was like the book that made him
yes,
in I want to say the 90s.
yeah.
And then he did Breakfast in Pluto, and those are all great. And there's really great movies that were made out of them. But I think he had a couple of lesser books after, and then I think I don't want to say his reputation, but like he was just putting out books, and I don't think they're making the big splash. So when he put out the big Pogue Mahone book, or he brought it to like his usual agent or publisher, like there was a pass because it's a big fat, like it's a big long narrative poem that just goes on, and it's really strange. And so I think the press he's on is called I think it's Unbound. It's the guy who hosts uh God, what's that podcast where they do old books that are out of print?
Not backlisted, but
Yeah, Backlisted.
backlisted is the right one.
No, yeah. Yeah, he's one of the publishers of that. So it's sort of a weird publishing model in the UK where they do crowdfunding as part of it. Like, I don't think it's entirely crowdfunded books, but it's like if you have a weird book and you think you can get some crowdfunding to help offset costs. So that's how the last two Patrick McCabe books have come out. And the
Yeah.
last one, and so when I was reading it, like I was excited, but the phrase that like they started, I guess, has been applied to him is bog gothic. And I just thought that was such a ridiculous, like maybe marketing phrase. But when I
Yes.
read that story about the shooting in Tipperary, I'm like, this is kind of it. It's basically like a good summation where it's like you have just everything you would expect, which is not only which is cheating people and a shooting, stalking. You have that, but not only that, but it's like everyone just is okay with this new arrangement that this guy's now living in this home, and it's just how it is. It's just this weird kind of rural, strange little gothic thing that you could see easily coming out of like something out of Flannery O'Connor or something like that too. It's got that kind of quality to it.
Another two quick things. Unbound is totally bankrupt and is like a huge publishing story, how it blew apart and like was then
No.
purchased and blew apart is totally like as of like 2 weeks ago, like totally
Oh
gone.
man.
And but the most recent Pogue Mahone book that was published by Biblioasis as well in North.
Yeah, they put it out in,
Yeah.
yeah, so I
So
wonder because that's hilarious because I just bought McCabe's book from Unbound, which is Golden something or other. I can't remember the name of it suddenly. So if that's the case, then that book probably came out in a very short-lived print run.
everything
And I'm
everything exploded apparently. There's like lots of articles about this. It's like chaotic, like what happened. There's like, it's one of those like paying Peter or getting money from Peter to pay Paul sort of like situations, like a kind of
no.
Ponzi scheme. Everything's sort of like vanished. There's if you look at Publishers Weekly, you'll find a treasure trove of articles about this.
Oh,
I was looking into
because
not
I
that
was
long
just
ago because someone brought it up and I was like, interesting. And then one of them popped up a few weeks ago where it's like, officially, this is dead.
wow. Because I was like the same thing. I'm like, this is such a weird model. Like, if this works, and if it's like, well, if McCabe's on it, there's a little sense of legitimacy. But apparently, no. And I don't think it's McCabe's doing, I think clearly, but I just want to know, like, how do you keep this going? Is this like a new 21st century? Is something like this something publishing needs to pivot to survive? Apparently not.
Yeah, no, not quite like that, anyways. But you never know. Like, if there's a bad actor in the mix, like it can screw up everything. It's like
Yeah.
the
Huh.
system could work, the person can execute it poorly. But
Well, I'll be looking into this out of curiosity, but yeah, it just,
do it's
I
very
don't even know how I
interesting.
got on this tangent, but oh well.
I don't either, but there is before unfortunately I'm gonna have to go in 10 minutes because I have to draft
Yeah.
a fantasy football team, which is stupid. And I don't know anything about football at this moment, and I'm going to be quickly as this starts Googling like who do I draft? I can only name about 8 players. Anyways, there are a couple things I did want to mention. One is that she did write a in memoriam to John O'Brien,
Mm.
in which it talks about like how she met him, his publishing of Aiden Higgins, and getting the book published. So this is an interesting paragraph. The Dogs of Inishere came out in the Irish literature series, which included fiction by contemporaries, cannot pronounce it, Eilish Jubjeen. I'm not sure how you say any of those words. Christine Dwyer Hickey and the critic Eileen Battersby, our favorite, coincidentally improving the gender balance of Dalkey's Irish list. Eileen was a close friend of John for most of 2015, 2016. They had long, almost daily phone conversations about books and writing, both being passionate advocates for the same kind of book. But he refused to edit her novel, Teeth Marks on My Tongue, insisting that it did not need editing. As a first time novelist, Eileen thought it did. Unfortunately, that soured the relationship, the friendship, which was a great pity. When Eileen died in the car accident in December 2018, John was devastated, like all her friends. Um, so there's Eileen, our,
That's
our
the
favorite like
story.
through line.
That's the thing. That's what did it. He
Yeah,
wouldn't
that's what
edit the
that's what
book because
did
he
it. He
didn't
wouldn't
think.
edit her book, maybe.
And she was so convinced that it needed editing that she was offended. That
I
is so fascinating.
It's really interesting that that's like any whatever version of what happened between them. We've heard like different pieces of it.
Yeah.
Seems really interesting, and like every one of them is like, oh, okay, I can kind of see that, and also like there seems like there's so much to this. Like that relationship seems really important. One of the other things that she mentions in here that I think is fun is that when he moves to Dublin, he starts going to the one of the finer restaurants in Dublin's Georgian Quarter, especially the restaurant Patrick Gibaw. And one of the things from working with John was that he really liked very fancy restaurants, and he would like to go to the same one over and over and over and over and over again. Like he would find a restaurant and just go there. We would find like an Italian restaurant in like whatever city, Estonia and Tallinn. And we would go to that every single day that we were in Tallinn. Like he would just like hone in on something. This restaurant is a 2 Michelin star restaurant that looks like astronomically amazing. And she does make a joke about like, even if you're doing this kind of literature, it doesn't mean you can't stop on like these kind of like perks to it. I think there's one other thing that they do talk about. She does talk about how like towards the end things start to fall apart. He did
Hmm.
spin off Sarah Davis Goff. I think is like sort of a like falls into the same camp of working with John that I did, in which she after leaving went and started Tramp Press, which is a really interesting press doing a book that we'll talk about in a second in Ireland, and sounds like she like learned from him, as she says. This is a quote from Sarah Davis Goff. Working for John wasn't always easy. He was exacting, artistically ambitious, and the most relentless worker I've ever met. It was these attributes that made him so great as a publisher. Surely very few have achieved as much as he did for literature, and particularly for work in translation. There's nobody better to learn from, and I'm so grateful for the time we had together, from setting up the Dublin office to hunting down authors in Estonia and Finland and flying the Dalkey Archive Press flag at festivals around the world. His death is not just a loss for his friends and family, but for the authors past, future, and present. Then she does talk about like issues that they had with John as a copy editor. Um, he's quote Neil. What's Neil's last name again? Neil Murphy. Neil. He
Neil
didn't give a
Murphy. Yeah.
damn. He repeatedly rebuked me and Keith for trying to get the prose right. Nobody cares, he would say, but he was wrong about that. Relations deteriorated during the production of the Healy books, and he became quite difficult to deal with, whereas before he was but quite pleasant. All of this does
Hmm.
point to that sort of like struggles, and many of these names I'm mentioning this for are people we've talked about, like the potential of doing
Yeah.
the Dermot Healy books. Neil Murphy shows up as being one of the big Higgins people who helped put together the Higgins the volume that's essays about his writing, and they seem to have the
The
same
one that
sort of
never
like
sold.
experience. Yeah, the one that never sold. There was someone on Instagram tagged me. They bought it. They took a picture and
Yeah,
tagged
I
it.
saw
So
that.
hell yeah,
I saw that.
let's
So you're
go.
selling some books. You're hand selling over the pod.
Now it's up to like 28 sales to lifetime. Um, but anyways, I think this book people should buy. I think this is a great book.
Yeah.
It is not I want to say quick read in a like derogatory way, in a quick read in a great way. Like in a like I can read this, you
Yeah.
get into it, you love it. You can set it down after each story, but it's very fun. It's very well done. She's quite brilliant. But then I think before we go, we should announce the next two books that we're doing, and
Yeah.
you're up
Oh yeah.
next.
So the one that I'm most interested in, I should have it with me so I can hold it
I
up. You
do.
can hold it up for me. It's just called Transit, right?
Yes, just
Yes,
transit.
and it's by Bernard Scher. So this is what the confusion is because I'm possibly going to confuse the two when I talk about them as well. But yeah, it's from reading just the jacket copy and the little that you kind of I think you did a little looking into it as well. Sounds amazing and really ambitious and really interesting and very funny in that very typically kind of like dark humor way that I sometimes associate with a lot of the better Irish stuff that I read. So I think it's going to be an interesting book, ambitious and strange in all the best ways.
The same, and I have not read him. He's mentioned in the Hopkin
Yeah.
or memoriam too, or the obit where he was represented by the same agent as all of them, Jonathan Williams. He's also the author of two other books, Slanguage, A Dictionary of Irish Slang, and Inish, which I is also published by Dalkey, which I plan on
Yeah.
reading in advance of this because I'm curious about what this is. Seems like a very big like play on language, lots of fun with that. And I want to say in transit, it says in transit, two men meet in an airport restroom. Quote, excuse me, but you're pissing on my foot, sometime in the early 1990s. The book we're going to do after that, so this one will be for September. For October, we'll do In Transit by Bridget Brophy, which is a book that I really champion to get back into print, and which Trent Press, who I just mentioned through that, they reprinted it in Ireland. So they have the edition in print in Ireland. Bridget Brophy's like one of the like the anniversaries of the life or birth or death is coming up. So there's like a biography being written. She's sort of being
Oh,
rediscovered. And this too, if I remember right, is set in an airport. And I think there's even a scene in a bathroom. So we're gonna go airport bathrooms for the next 2 months. Seems like a good place to be.
nice.
And two Irish books
Yeah.
with the word transit in the title. Let's go.
It seems perfect. The gods have set this up. I'm really excited to read these two. I have not read Cher yet, but I have read Bridget Brophy, not this book. So I'm really excited to see what this is all about.
Me too. I'm excited to revisit it. And it does have an introduction. I'll tell one quick story before we have to get off. Is that the introduction in Transit is by Christine Brooke Rose, very experimental
Hmm.
British writer, amazing. Like played a lot with like the construction of how words are shown on the page and like typography, but also like just ideas and accents and whatnot. When she wrote this introduction, she emailed me and was like, she's like, I can barely get out of bed. I had to crawl my way across the room to type this email. And like all of it was like when you read it, it's like a Beckett play. It's like the funniest, in some ways, like the funniest thing I've ever heard, but also like heartbreaking because she's like she died very shortly thereafter. Um,
Oh, wow. Okay.
very
So
ill. But like, so it's like dark and like sad, and it's like she wanted her books back in print. Delkey did at least one of them, and we were talking about doing more before I left. But just the thing of it of her like, I just have this vision of her like pulling herself to this desk to bang out this like essay on Bridget Brophy. So honoring Christine
oh my
Brooke
God.
and Bridget Brophy. But first, Bernard Scher will be recording later this month in September. Transit, get your copy now. Read that. Tell your friends to buy Alannah's book, Dogs of Inishere. Get ready. We'll have some more great stuff coming.
Yeah, exciting. Woohoo.